Do you find yourself actively trying to unlearn things that you learned over the 9 year stint at Google in order to
Yeah.
be more successful?
Oh God, yes, all the time. It is incredible. It is like, whenever somebody says something that, hey, we're gonna launch thing X. I'm like, okay, great. So there's gonna be a design document. There's gonna be a committee. There's gonna be a forum. We're gonna review it. We're gonna make decisions. We're gonna put it into the roadmap. We'll get to it 6 months from now. Like that's my natural thing. And in the startup environment, it's much more like, well, can we get it out tomorrow morning? Well, we didn't do all of this kind of testing. You're like, well, that's fine. It's okay. We'll figure it out.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the If Then podcast. This is your host, Debo Ray. And today we are joined by Michael Avrukin, who's the head of engineering at a company called Turnkey. And he was formerly a director of engineering of the product platform team over at Angie. So Michael, awesome to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure. It's exciting.
Michael, we have a little, it's almost like a tradition on this podcast. Before we get started, I ask guests about their most memorable meal from your recent memory. Would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, sure. So the King David in Jerusalem used to have a really special restaurant. They used to have this incredible 15-course tasting menu. And me and my wife still to this day, we had it probably 7 or 8 years ago. We still talk about that meal. It was just absolutely incredible. The service, the food, everything. It was just like a meal you don't forget. And we've been on the hunt for something like that for many, many years. We haven't found it. And sadly, during COVID, that restaurant closed down. And when they reopened it, they didn't do the same thing anymore. And so that was a very memorable experience.
That's an awesome thing. Nice. Okay, now we can dive in. So Michael, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm Michael Avrukin. I am currently the head of engineering at a company called Turnkey. We have a technology for what's known as trusted execution environments, where we're responsible for cryptographic secrets on behalf of many of our customers. Prior to this, I was at Angie, where I was responsible for the product platform team, helping to build that out. That was a little bit of a short stint, about 6 months. And before that, I spent 9 years at Google. The last 5.5 of that was managing the Google Sheets infrastructure and mobile teams, and helping to really scale and build out that product to both its user-based scaling, product scaling, and everything else around that. Lots of other things before that as well.
That's awesome. So, Michael, what attracted you to Turnkey?
Right. So I have a really deep love for hard technical problems. So the harder the problem, the more gnarly it is, the scarier it is, the more excited I get. And when your recruiters reached out and said, hey, we have this really technical problem. They're dealing with a lot of cryptography things. They're dealing with a lot of user data. It's in the crypto space, but not quite in the crypto space. It's dealing with all of these sort of complicated, gnarly pieces, and they need someone to help start to form it in much more into an organization. They've got a good product market fit. They've got a lot of customers. It's growing rapidly. I said, sign me up. So that was effectively the attraction. Gnarly mess, complicated technical problem. That gets me.
In general, is something from the Google Sheets days, is that carrying over in terms of type of problem?
Yeah. So it's a great question. A lot of the problems we're facing Google Sheets in terms of scaling were scaling the product, scaling the team, scaling the infrastructure. And coming into here, it's effectively many of those same problems, slightly different scaling challenges, but very similar customer scaling needs, very similar organizational scaling needs. And I think the big advantage is that at Google had a lot of bureaucracy and red tape you were constantly fighting, and there was a lot of approvals. Here, it's much more like, hey, how do we get things out of our way? How do we eliminate decision-making? How do we improve velocity? So it's sort of almost like you get to work on the same problem just without the bureaucracy.
Do you find yourself actively trying to unlearn things that you learned over the 9 year stint at Google in order to be more successful?
Oh God, yes, all the time. It is incredible. It is like, whenever somebody says something that, hey, we're going to launch thing X. I'm like, okay, great. So there's going to be a design document. There's going to be a committee. There's going to be a forum. We're going to review it. We're going to make decisions. We're going to put it into the roadmap. We'll get to it 6 months from now. Like that's my natural thing. And in the startup environment, it's much more like, well, can we get it out tomorrow morning? Well, we didn't do all of this kind of test. You're like, well, that's fine. That's okay. We'll figure it out. Is it good enough? Does it violate any kind of issues? You're like, no, it's okay. So what's the problem? Let's just push it out. Right. So there's a lot more of that kind of attitude. I mean, not quite as cowboyish, but there's a lot more of like moving quickly, making decisions quickly, whereby at Google, it was a lot more about the process and about the structure and about the formality of how do you actually sort of execute on things.
So after you joined Turnkey, Michael, is there some of the things that you have been trying to essentially enact a cultural change around, or was this already present and that seemed to shape how you were also operating?
So the currently, I'll give you an example. We had about three recent features that we were getting out to production. And I'm not going to go into the specific details of those, but we're trying to get three things out. All of them took a lot longer than we expected. But part of the reason was that we actually jumped in and just started doing the work. We didn't really do any planning or thinking ahead of time. So what I'm actually trying to bring in isn't the like heavy process, but just a little bit of those tweaks that are going to help to shape the organization so that we can do that. So like, for example, the next batch of work, I'm asking everybody, okay, let's just do a 1 to 2 page design document up front with a few of our key milestones broken down, right? It's supposed to try to ship a massive pull request that's like 10,000 lines. Let's try and ship smaller incremental ones, right? Which was more of a Google type of approach. So that's the Google way of moving quickly. But at the same time, like the Google thing that was pushing you against you was all of the approvals and all of the bureaucracy and like decision making around what is it that we're doing. Here, I'm trying to give the structure in terms of how we're doing this. And I think that's going to be the thing that enables the organization to move better.
So it sounds like you can essentially like feel, right, that things are moving faster in this turnkey ecosystem than it would in a larger company. Is there something else like even for us at DevZero, we see a couple of things like oftentimes qualitatively things it feels like, okay, this is like the train is moving really fast and everything around us is a little hazy. But how do you quantify that? Or do you not care about that at all at this point?
I think the quantification is actually very simple. We are consistently in a place where we have a customer that's looking at us and they're looking at a potentially competitor. They're looking at, let's say, Privy, they're looking at Dynamics, looking at a couple of other offerings. And the question becomes, when they give us a question, when they give us an ask before they make the decision, how quickly can we respond to that if it's something that we haven't built? So if we're able to turn around within 24 or 48 hours, a customer asks and implement a feature or give them the documentation or help them out on a call, that's your velocity measurement because you're able to beat your competitors in terms of being able to show them that you really care, you can hustle and get it done.
The nimbleness, yeah, this makes sense. Is there anything in this startup, like again, comparing, I used to work at Uber and ultimately we ended up with a similar set of like internal processes and tooling to probably what you experienced at Google. Do you wish you had some of that stuff at Turnkey that you feel would let you ship even faster?
So it's a great question. A lot of the founders for the company came from Coinbase. So they actually brought a lot of the thinking behind how Coinbase was operating. So one of the things I was tremendously impressed by is the amount of tooling that they put in place around things like code generation, automation, build and release processes. One of the core principles there is actually we need to have a human element in the release process because we want to make sure there is at least 2 humans who physically sign the hash keys for the releases because of the security concerns. So that becomes a human element in the process that slows you down just a little bit. But otherwise, the level of automation and processes that have been built has been very good, but it also hasn't burdensome. It also hasn't been like, hey, we're going to go and, overdo it. It's been like a very healthy balance of like, how do we build the software stack in such a way that it really leverages us to the best of our abilities? How does it give us the opportunity to glue the pieces together without writing a lot of code? How does it let us do things correctly without, over engineering it themselves?
Yeah, that's really cool. In general, from let's say the business or the engineering perspective of Turnkey, what are the biggest challenges you're essentially working on right now?
Yeah. I think the challenges are a couple of fronts. One is the core technology is actually pretty hard. the core technology is a lot of cryptography based areas and provability and secret management. We have to make sure that the user's private data stays private. That's really important. Use private keys stay private. So that's a really big challenge. And we put a lot of these manual human intervention in the process very intentionally to slow everything down just a little bit, so that the things are actually intentionally sort of like not going. We're not releasing as quickly as we potentially would want to. Why? Because we want to have human eyes on the code that's going out and verifying everything we're building. So that's the thing that's slowing you down a little. Go back to the original part of the question, so I think there was two parts to it.
Yeah, like essentially, like in terms of the infrastructure challenges and stuff, like you alluded to one part of the software development process of like requiring this review. Fundamentally, anything manual slows things down. And
Yeah.
when it gets taken to an extreme, you end up with the bureaucracy and red tape that we would have experienced in the bigger companies. But generally, from a software infrastructure or this product that we are building from this perspective, what are the biggest challenges at Turnkey?
Yeah. So that would be one of the challenges, the cryptographic security. The other one right now is really figuring out what is the feature set that we need to be developing for customers, and making sure that we are building the right things. We have limited resources. We have to be very thoughtful in terms of what are we doing. There are many different paths the company can go on. We can go down a very sort of verifiable compute environment. And verifiable compute sort of has to deal with like, hey, we're running with these enclaves and secure environments and everything else, and really building infrastructure there. Or we're focusing much more on the consumer journey, the consumer experience, and building a product journey versus an infrastructure journey over there. So those are sort of strategic decisions. And I think the challenge is, how do we leverage our people in the best possible way that we can, in a way, move forward on both fronts. We can make a wonderful SDK with wonderful UI components for our users to just plug into, but we can also continue to improve and broaden the set of features that our infrastructure has. And we can be best in class in terms of security. We can always be on the forefront of what the security needs are in the marketplace. Just to give it a specific example, we're currently using Nitro enclaves for executing a lot of our most sensitive code. That's within AWS. It's a very sort of secure environment. We need to break out of that in the sense of start doing similar things in GCP and potentially on-prem and other environments. We haven't really carved that path out, and there's a lot of technical gaps and challenges to do that. But we need to do that, so that if you want to go to a bank and launch your technology within, let's say, a JP Morgan or somebody else, they potentially want to run it on-prem. So you have to be able to offer that. There's a lot of this sort of technical need that you have to build out, and that's its own set of technical challenges we haven't solved yet. So there's a lot of difficulty there in terms of really building out the toolbox of components that we haven't quite finished.
I know a lot of our listeners are also essentially in earlier stage companies, folks that have seen how bigger companies operate and are now trying to build similar technologies outside. So I'd love to dig into this one component that you mentioned over there, Michael, around the strategic decision making around how do we take, is this even a right approach or a point of view to be thinking down? Infrastructure first versus like open consumers coming, like little companies signing up, like using this thing, versus, because the way you build the product for both of those personas almost is slightly different. And my question is, does supporting both end up diluting the overall experience for both audiences, or does it not?
The way I like to think of it is that it's a pendulum. It's a pendulum that swings from infrastructure focus to product focus, and sort of in different phases of the life cycle of the company, you're going to prioritize different things. But if you don't invest in your infrastructure, that is effectively your moat, your technological moat, and the thing that protects you. Your SOL. Like, someone is going to, if the only thing you have is a pretty product user journey, someone can copy it easily and, put something better, and then you're out of business and people will move to that. But if you have a core technology that's very hard to replicate, and a core service that works well, it delivers a very particular kind of value, then that is what brings users ultimately, whether they realize it or not. The way I like to to think of it is that a lot of people think that Google's advantage is its search or its machine learning or it's none of those things. Google's real market advantage over so many competitors is its infrastructure and the tooling and the automation that it has in-house. And the fact that it can do the things that it does at the scale that it does internally, that people don't see externally, that's the real leverage. And if it didn't invest in those things, if it didn't invest in the data centers and in the compute and the tooling and the automation on top of it, it would never be able to do all of the other things that it does. It's the same thing here. We have to invest in our core technology in terms of what our core infrastructure principles are. And if we don't, someone else is just going to come along, copy and do it better, and then you're SOL.
I remember a lot of my past colleagues at Uber who had come from Google. They talk about the monorepo structure, etc., that you all had internally. What is publicly known as internally was Blaze, externally it's Bazel. Are some of those things and all of the tooling and ecosystem around it, is that something you missed today, or do you already have it?
Well, I think, GitHub is trying, if you're using GitHub and GitHub Actions and that ecosystem, I think it's trying to get there and it's getting close in terms of what it's offering, in terms of some of that automation. At Turnkey, we haven't used Bazel. We did a lot of our own build tooling with it looks like, lots of Makefile, but it's a lot of people who have 20 years of Makefile experience.
Yes. Talk through it.
Yeah. Which to me initially seemed very scary, but then the moment I started taking this out, actually it's done pretty well. Although at the end of the day, I do think that a year from now, I can see us starting to move to something like Bazel in terms of like leveraging, but that's just the build element of the whole thing. I mean, never wind up at all. But the real tooling is in terms of, hey, what happens when you build the code and commit the code and pre-commit the hooks? Right now, like I can run, let's say I make a protobuf change and I run this make command in the protobuf side of things here. It triggers a whole bunch of automation that builds and rebuilds all of these libraries downstreams and checks and verifies and does all the top linting so that I know that it did the right things. And that's very similar to what was there at Google. And it's one of those things that leveraged very nicely here without those people ever seeing the Google thing. I'm the only Googler at the moment here. Maybe one person was an ex-Googler from like 10 years ago.
Okay. That's awesome. Now going a little deeper into the operation side of, let's say, the software development process. I remember you used to do a lot of SRE stuff at Google before you transitioned to the Google Sheets side of the house. Is there something you have been advocating for in Turnkey? And like something that you advocated for, maybe you all have already made the change and you realize this doesn't work in this context anymore, or something that has?
Yeah. So the first thing we actually came in, we had a few like outages and things and customer complaints. And I said, well, where are SLO dashboards? The response was like, well, we haven't put them together. So I actually said that I put the SLO dashboards and the SLO metrics for the core journeys right away. And then we looked at them and we say, hey, like, we had a bump that we don't have a good explanation for in terms of latencies that happened about, a month and a half ago. So that can be a project we're going to investigate. I'm working on wrapping up the error dashboards and defining our own latencies, our error SLOs there. So that's important there. And you need that information. If you don't have it, you don't have good visibility into that. You're sort of flying blind. We had a customer early in the week escalate, be like, hey, like I received an error from this one request and what's wrong with your service? And we actually looked at the whole thing and they literally over a period, this whole month, what is it, the 20th, they've had like 3 error requests that returned 500 out of like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of requests. And so I was like, this is like well above like 5 nines worth of SLO. We're fine, but you have to be able to have that information available to you and be able to respond to that. So that's one of those things that sort of fairly quickly was like, yeah, we need to have that. Yeah. Even if we don't set up projects to prioritize on those things, having those metrics and visibility is like super critical and important.
Yeah, because like oftentimes, I've also experienced this here. People only give you feedback when things are especially bad and get hyper focused on that. But like being able to look at the bigger picture of how we were doing actually, very important. Okay, no, this is awesome. To me, it sounds like, Michael, you have like thought very deeply about the overall software development process, all of the tooling, etc., be it around the level of detail to which you went, like I make a protobuf change, a bunch of things are essentially getting built, etc., immediately. So stuff shows up in my IDE, IntelliSense, everything just works. After that, I push my code, stuff is happening. And in the release process, we have to have a little bit of manual intervention for clear business reasons. So what is your overall view on the importance of like this developer experience theme in a company, especially at the earlier stages, because often we get focused on chip, but then you realize I could potentially have been shipping a little bit faster if I didn't have to like face all of these micro operation points on a day-to-day basis. How do you feel about it?
So I think the way I look at it is it's the same way you build a house, right? It's you need to make sure you have a good foundation. If you don't have a good foundation, the whole thing's just going to kind of crumple down. If you want to build something tall, you can build something tall very quickly from matches and sticks. You can do that. That's not hard. And you can make something look very beautiful. Look at this. When you start everything out of matchsticks. And then the wind comes along and topples the whole thing over. Right? And nobody can actually live on the top floors because it's not stable. So you have to invest in that foundation. Now, the question is, do you need a 100-story building foundation for like your house? No. Do you need like, a 100-story building foundation for a 10-story building? Probably not. Overkill. But you got to know what is that right level of foundation that you have to lay that really is going to support your business. And if you're going to add floors, then maybe the first thing you need to do is go back and revisit and say, is my foundation stable enough? Do I have the right piping? Do I have the right wiring? Is everything like ready to go? And if it isn't, then I need to invest in that first before I do the extra build out on top. So like I'm sitting in an office right here in my home that does not have enough AC vents in the summer. So when they added sort of this whole area to the house, they didn't actually do the right work to put the AC through. So now you can't really use this area properly in the summer. That's an example of not really thinking through this process, but yeah, that's a small example. Same thing with software. Software is no different. You got to invest upfront in the tooling and some of the foundation. Don't overdo it, but then always keep coming back to it and saying, where are we stumbling? What's slowing us down? What can we do to invest to make us move faster, more reliably, so that we're not spending human effort on this?
This is very cool. And in general, do you essentially see having some level of past experience in having worked in some of these ecosystems? Does that, I'm assuming that gives you some of that level of experience to be able to see around the next corner or the one after that?
Exactly. Yeah, I think I don't think there's a prescriptive element. There's more of an element of intuition. We had a call last night in terms of with the infrastructure team. And somebody said, well, why don't we use this tool off the shelf? And my gut intuition right away was like, well, we could use it and it's going to give us a potential boost in the short term. But what's going to wind up happening, because we already have existing tooling infrastructure that helps us out, is that 3 months or 6 months down the line, all of a sudden the tool is going to become a liability for us in this particular domain. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it is going to become something that we can use well. But let's make sure we do it strategically and correctly. So I don't have the specifics, but there's an element of intuition, having seen some of these problems before, where you're like, yes, I can see the positive, but I can also see what's going to potentially come up in terms of how things can play out as well.
You mentioned the infra team, the importance of this overall like platformish thinking as well as product. How have you structured your team today? Is it by function or is it like by, I'd love to learn.
Yeah. So it's funny. So that was actually one of the first things that the CTO, Jack, who he's my direct manager. So we actually talked through this when I joined. Like, how should this be structured? How the whole organization should be structured? And we've intentionally not cut the lines at this point in time. We've got, let's say, about 20 engineers overall. We haven't put anyone into particular box. It's been very intentional. We talked about a little bit more recently, well, should we? And because we've seen some of a more natural emergence of where people are leaning towards. So I think the one area we have a little bit more natural boxiness is a little bit more on the product side and the SDK side of the front end side. There's a little bit more of a sort of compartmentalization of like the folks who are attracted to that more. And there's some people who are very like tools and infra attracted. There's a few folks in that box as well. And
Yeah.
then there's sort of this middle group of individuals, was like sort of probably a good half of the company, half of engineering, maybe even more, who are actually sort of drifting between the two ends. They're sort of are in different spaces, and we are probably not going to necessarily assign any labels to them. We're just going to keep moving this way forward for as long as we can. Yes, we're putting people into pods and efforts and structuring that way. But honestly, I am resisting carving out teams at the moment. I'm resisting carving out sort of like these very hard lines because I think it's a competitive advantage having the latitude and the freedom to move. Everybody has the freedom to move. Everybody has the freedom to dig in. But the moment you sort of assign those labels, whether people want to or not, there's sort of somebody clicks in the back of their brain. Oh, I'm the product person. I'm not supposed to dig with the tools. Oh, I'm the tool
Yeah.
person. I'm not supposed to talk about the SDK. And it's like, no, we want you to be the owners of the whole thing. And if you see that the tooling is broken, feel free to jump in and adjust, be it the YAML file or be it the splash or be it whatever it is. You're entitled. You just go do it. And we want to keep that culture as much as we can. And then eventually we'll have to carve the line. But until we really, really have to, we want to keep it moving as one unit.
This is really cool. Yeah. I hadn't like connected the dots on this before, but like when you start to draw some of these lines, like even how you approach a certain problem or how to go about solving it, you can't really get out of that box that you've just gotten yourself into. So
Yeah.
very cool. Okay.
Like you've heard of the bias busting type of thing. This is classic bias busting, right? You put somebody into the product bias. Oh, this is my SDK person. Or this is my iOS person, right? And you just by definition never offer them any of the other things. Can they do it? Maybe they could potentially do it wonderfully, but you have a certain bias. Oh, that's my person.
It's cool. In general, I keep thinking about this a lot, and the answer can be qualitative or quantitative. But Michael, how do you know that overall the team is doing well, and the team, like including yourself? Like, yeah, very curious.
I think that one is hard. I think there's an element of intuition where you need to sort of see the smiles of people's faces and hear the laughter and have a little bit of of the the joint experience. When people are choosing to, you're not telling them to push hard, but they're choosing to push hard and they're really choosing to be owners and step in. And hey, there's a random customer escalation on a thread at like 10:30 at night, and people jump in and they just want to do that. And then they're available first thing next morning and they keep chugging along. And you don't see a resentment. You actually see a little bit of a joy. I think things are doing well. So that's for themselves. I think being able to evaluate yourself is much harder because you have to be your own grader. And to be honest with you, the more senior you become, the harder the self evaluation gets, because the standard that you have for yourself or what you expect of yourself is very different from the standard that the people who are reporting to you want from. And I think that there's a really fundamental disconnect from what you think your job should be, what you should be doing, from what the people who are reporting to you. At a certain point in seniority, that's the people who are grading you. It's not your managers, because there potentially isn't a manager anymore, or there's somebody who technically on paper they're your manager, but they're much more like your peer. And so really the people who are grading your reports, and it becomes a matter of like, well, what do they think of the job that you're doing, or what could you be doing differently that would make them happier? And there's a lot of challenges there, to be honest. But I think it's a very, very difficult thing. I can't say that I've mastered it, far from it. Most of the time, I prefer to take the outlook that I'm screwing things up and I have to do better, and that I'm missing the ball and I'm dropping the ball. And the more critical I am of myself, the more sort of like a little bit of pins and needles of like, hey, I'm screwing things up. The more I am in that sort of feeling, the better, the less surprised I am when things don't go right, or the more open I am to feedback, the more open I am to realizing something isn't working. I think the more you think of like, hey, I'm doing a great job, the worst place you're in. So.
From any tactic or tips of something that might have worked for you in order to like get this feedback from your team, or like a certain way in which you end up choosing to conduct yourself in order to dig out truth?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll use the radical radical candor framework. So people actually need to read the book. Don't read the cliff notes. Don't watch the Silicon Valley. That's not Actually read the text and see what it says. Don't assume that it says. It's actually opposite of what the title is, which is the good part. But the one of the most important things that what's her name? Kim, can't remember her last name. So she talks about in the book is that you actually have to make yourself vulnerable to the team first. They're not going to come to you and share their issues unless you actually create a forum where people feel comfortable speaking out and saying, "Hey, like you're screwing something up." So one of the things that I tend to do is I do as much as I can of giving people the opportunity to give me feedback honestly, and I show them that I'm responsive to it and that I'll change things and that I'm not going to retaliate against them and I'm not going to they're not going to be any worse off if they tell me, "Hey, you screwed this up," or "You could have done this better," or "This isn't working." I'm like, "Okay, thank you. Like, let's figure out how we can do that." And I will spend a lot of time soliciting that feedback and trying to get that feedback and creating various forums, being in anonymous channels, being at, one-on-ones, being in more group discussions, being in postmortem reviews. And I try to make it as like, you can say whatever you want and it's fine. I'm not gonna be offended by it. And after you've done that a lot and you've built that trust, only then can you actually start giving a little bit more of the feedback to your folks. But you have to become the vulnerable. You have to take that first step of being able to say, it's okay for you to tell me if I'm not doing things right. It's okay for me to screw things up, and you can create that culture that making mistakes is fine. No one's had some chopping block for that. And I think that's an important element.
I think one core takeaway that I got from what you just said, Michael, was like you're seeking this feedback across a variety of channels, like including even a postmortem report, or I don't, maybe even a design document somewhere where I think it's Conway's law, right? That says all the software we built, it's like the teams that we are essentially based in. So very, very cool. Is the team globally distributed today?
It is. We've got folks essentially from Australia all the way out to New York.
How's that?
So, God. That's the 7 p.m. meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's to bring the Australia folks in and the West Coast folks and the New York time folks. So nobody's happy, except the California folks. For them, it's 4 p.m. So that's the hard part. But at the same time, I think that's just the reality. You have great talent everywhere. People who've worked together before actually like working with each other again. So a lot of the folks here have worked together before. They have a high level of trust. They have a high level of camaraderie. And that's important. That actually really helps you move more quickly. And so, so you take the cost of having a little bit more of a distributed team and having to work for that. It's okay.
This is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing these, Michael. I think we are also getting close to time. So I'd love to maybe end on the note of, is there something you'd like to tell the audience about Turnkey? Why someone should take a look and use it?
We're probably the only ones that have a truly secure environment for your private secrets at this moment in time, with a really configurable SDK with a really good execution engine. And we really take user privacy seriously, like that, or sort of data privacy seriously, not just data privacy seriously and security. And the company is built with really core security privacy tenants in its foundation, at its core. And it's not just a slogan, like it's really permeates through the entire organization. So if it's something that's important to you, then we're here to take care of you.
So with that, maybe we can end today. Michael, thank you so much again for coming on this episode. It's been a pleasure essentially chatting with you over the last couple of months, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.